Hello and welcome back. As promised, this is the second installment of using food in training. I will provide a link to the part 1 should you want to look at that at the bottom of this recording. So just as a little recap here, a primary reinforcer in plain English means that we do not need to teach the dog to want or enjoy food. There are many other types of reinforcers, primary reinforcers, such as rest when the dog is tired, water when thirsty, access to mates and social interactions, and the like. So using primary reinforcer is a really smart way to train. Now let's look at other considerations when using food in training. If your dog just had a meal, most likely it would not be interested in the food that you are planning or providing as part of your training. So the dog is now satiated, so food is not that attractive at the moment. And because of this, it will not be as interesting or a true reinforcer for that dog at that moment. Now, if your dog is really hungry, the food that you are using in training is going to be much more attractive. In other words, your dog is going to be willing to work for that food that you are providing because it's hungry. Training with gold. Training with gold is a really important concept to understand, and actually not only understand conceptually, but know how to apply it. So we all know that we are constantly competing with the environment and the reinforcers it provides when we're training our dogs. There are plentiful of interesting smells, other dogs that they want to access, people if they're people friendly, the movement of other animals such as your neighbor's cat, or even a leaf falling from a tree. So there is always something that is calling for our dog's attention. So training with gold means that we know exactly what our dog considers something of high value. And I'm talking here, of course, specifically about food. So that when we're training in an environment where we most likely are going to encounter these other reinforcers for our dog, we can show up with something that the dog will have interest in. Now, it's important to consider that if your dog really loves cheese, and let's say that is considered a 10 out of a 10, it doesn't mean it's going to want cheese all the time. Reinforcers do change. So if we get very savvy, perhaps what we'll do is, depending on the environment, if the environment is in a high distracting environment, remember reinforcers are distractions, or to say it the other way, distractions can be reinforcers as well. But if we're using food and wanting to compete for those distractions or reinforcers, we might be really keen in bringing several high-value reinforcers to match the environment that we're going to be training our dog in. It is not the same to train at the dog park than in your kitchen. So consider the level of difficulty regarding the reinforcers or distractions that you and your dog are going to encounter. Another important consideration is overfeeding our dogs because we're working with food. So there is really an epidemic in dog obesity in this country. And even 1 pound of extra weight is considered an important number when it comes to dogs, because of course they don't weigh as much as we do. In order to avoid obesity or even just your dog being fat, I strongly suggest that we use our dog's meals as reinforcers of food in training. In addition, instead of adding treats to the food's daily caloric intake. Number one, if you're only using treats, just keep in mind that a treat is not a balanced meal. So it is so much better if your dog really enjoys its food to use it in training. And just avoid the treats or use the treats judiciously so that you're not adding to the caloric intake of your dog. And I would add that if your dog is really not that interested in its food, just change the food. Find something else that your dog is actually wanting to eat. It just adds for a better quality of life. Resource guarding. Resource guarding means that a dog finds a particular resource attractive and it wants it for itself. So if you are working with more than one dog at home, it is really savvy to not put dogs in a situation where they're competing for either your attention or the food that you're using. So I recommend separating the dogs, and you will have to potentially work on this aside from your training session so that you don't have a dog upset or barking as you're trying to train the other dog. So this will be something that might require extra work for you ahead of training sessions. But you could easily rotate the dogs. So maybe you work with dog A in the morning, dog B in the afternoon, or one on Monday, the other one on Tuesdays. There's a gazillion ways of doing this. But you want to make sure that the dogs are separated, and the dog that is not being trained also has an activity that the dog finds interesting. And then again, you can keep your training sessions super short. Maybe it's a 3-minute training sessions. You are rotating the dogs within a training session. This makes for a fun activity for everybody and very efficient training. So these are considerations to take into account if you are going to be using food in training, which, as I said before, I highly recommend you do.